everybody, this is Angela Savage, the daughter of IndyCar driver Swede Savage. It's time to watch stories from motorsports. My buddy, Doug Kenny, loves to share the journey of people in racing, and he is an amazing dude. Drivers, owners, fans, and team members, watch the SFM podcast.
Hey everybody, this is Doug Kenny from Stories from Motorsports. I'd like to thank my buddy Josh Mabe for the YouTube work he did years ago that inspired me to create this platform. I'd like to thank my buddy Victor Sifton for convincing me to get back into it after my hiatus from 2017 to 2019. I have a very special treat for you all today with an amazing journey from an amazing racing figure. Drivers, start your engines. Hey y'all, this is Doug Kenny again. Hope things are well, and I'm about to do an interview with Buz McCall. Let's see how it turns out.
American Equipment Company, this is Frida. How may I help you?
Hey, my name is Doug Kenny, and I have an interview scheduled with Buz McCall.
Yes, can you hold on one moment? I'd be happy to get him.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes, hello.
Hey, Buz, this is Doug Kenny talking.
Hi, Doug. How are you?
Good. Are you free for that interview?
I am. You want to just give me a second? I want to close my door for a minute.
All right, cool. Sounds good.
Hold on a second. Okay.
So, I thought I would tell you a little bit more about myself to kind of start it out. I'm an author and a YouTuber, and I'm a social media figure on the rise. And I have connections to a lot of the NASCAR team owners, as well as a lot of people in NASCAR. Yeah, and how I managed to find you was through Vic Sifton of Kanaska Racing. And he told me that you're the type of guy that would be willing to chat about, Trans Am or sports car racing, or even your NASCAR career. Yeah, so I thought I'd ask you a little bit about your involvement in motor racing.
Sure.
So what I thought I'd ask first off is, how did you get involved in motor racing?
Well, when I was a young kid, my father took me to the local short track, and I was always enthralled with the stock cars and the back in those days in the 50s, the dirt tracks and up in Illinois, and it was just something that always interested me. And fast forward till early 1980s, I discovered that I could go to a place like Skip Barber and actually learn to drive a race car, and albeit a Formula Ford. That's what I did.
That's really
and
cool.
That was in 1981. That I went to Skip Barber.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, in Skip Barber, that was the era of Jeff Andretti and Michael Andretti and
Mario.
And some of those younger guys were also cutting their teeth of racing. So it was quite interesting. Skip Barber was quite well known for developing guys that went on and and had certainly great careers and interesting careers in racing. And after Skip Barber, I was lucky to find a school teacher that was a good racer and had no money. So I rented his car for the regional SCCA weekends, and that afforded him the opportunity to run the national week races. In those days, they used to have the regional on Saturday and the national on Sunday. So, and it was one of the top GT5 cars, which was an old Datsun 1200. And I went back and looked at some of the records, and in that year I ran in 23 races and won 21 of them. So it was a great car. It was not so much me, but it was a great car.
Yeah.
And
especially if you win out all those races out of like 23 of them, that's a lot.
It was unbelievable. And my whole racing career could probably be summed up into the fact that I happened to have unplanned events occur that mapped out my career. I'd meet somebody just by chance, and one thing would lead to another, and it all unfolded. I had a friend that I had met, and Skip Barber called me up, and he was getting divorced, and he needed to protect his race car from the wife's lawyers, and he asked me to buy his car for a short period of time, which I agreed to do. And the next thing I know, I ended up owning a GT1 car because he never ever bought it back from me. and that's what got me into IMSA. I drove that car as a GTO car. And again, ran into a guy named Tom Sheehy, who was he was a Delta captain, among other things, but he was an unlimited hydroplane driver.
Oh, I've heard of those.
And Tom drove the Miss Bud Light and Miss Madison and some great boats, and he had a flair for sponsorships and understanding the sponsorship game, and together we made a pretty good team, and that's how we ended up getting U.S. Tobacco, and we had the Skoal Bandit car in IMSA for almost 7 years, which was amazing to think of. And it became pretty obvious that we knew how to get sponsorship, and once our IMSA days were done, Chevrolet approached me in 1990 and asked me if I would be let's call it the B team, the factory B team in Trans Am. And I had U.S. Tobacco as a sponsor, and that's when I stopped driving, and Jack Baldwin was my driver in 1990 in Trans Am. And we did very well. I think we were about 5th in points.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah, and in the last race of the year, which was in St. Pete, the gentleman who ran Chevrolet's Motorsports came over and asked me if I would be interested to talk to them about becoming their main factory team in Trans Am. And of course I said yes. Yeah. And so I had a conversation with them. It happened just about this past. I had a conversation with them at St. Pete, and they said, we want you to have a 2-car team. We want you to hire Scott Sharp. Want you to hire Jack Baldwin. And we want you to be the factory team.
That's really cool.
And I said, well, give me about 5 minutes. And so I walked over to the Newman Sharp trailer, and Scott was there, and that was when Paul Newman was still driving with him. And I asked Scott, I said, would you like to join us next year as the number 1 team? And before Scott said yes, his father Bob said absolutely. So I went back over to Chevrolet and said, okay, I've got Scott Sharp committed, and of course Jack Baldwin was more than happy to be involved, and
Awesome.
we became their factory team. I had Duracell as Scott's sponsor, and Skoll was still Jack's sponsor. And we were first and second in the championship. And that continued on for 3 years with that lineup, where we won 3 straight championships with Scott and Jack. We were first and second all 3 years.
Awesome.
And then Scott Sharp let me know that he was going to move on and go to IndyCars, IRL, which he did.
Oh, yeah,
And
he won a pole at the Indy 500, I believe, in 2001.
Yeah. And Chevrolet approached me and said, we want you to hire Scott Pruitt.
Ooh.
And Scott Pruitt had been seriously injured in a testing accident in his IndyCar days.
Yeah.
So I got in touch with Scott, and we were able to make a deal, and Scott came on board and actually won the championship in 1994. So we won 4 in a row, and Scott accomplished what he wanted to accomplish, which was reestablish his career, which he did. And so at the end of 94, he left and went on to get back into his, IndyCars and other pro racing. And so Chevrolet came and knocked on my door again and said, we want you to hire Ron Fellows.
Oh.
So I went out and hired Ron and Jamie Gallus. And while we didn't win the championship, we were, I think, second both of those years with Ron, and Jamie was in the top 5.
Oh.
And those were great salad days of, having the factory support, and those were just great Trans Am days. And so in 95, I think it was 94, 95, 94, Chevrolet came to me and said, have you ever thought about doing NASCAR?
Ooh.
And I said, not really. And they said, well, we know of a team that's for sale, and we would certainly give you some help if you wanted to do that. And I said, well, I never have said no to you guys yet. So I was able to make contact with the team that was for sale and actually bought that team. It was a team that was owned by Carol Levin, and she had a general manager named Butch Enders, and Butch was a well-known team manager in both from road racing days and in NASCAR, the Busch Series.
Oh.
So I acquired the team, and again, through a set of ironies, I ended up with Caterpillar as a sponsor.
Oh.
And I had a rookie driver that really wasn't ready for NASCAR. And after about, I think 5 or 6 races, it was pretty apparent that wasn't going to work.
Uh-huh.
And once again, Chevrolet came and knocked on my door and said, we know a driver that needs needs some tender loving care, and we think you can help him in his career. And he was in Winston Cup at the time, and he was really struggling, and he needed to get back in the Busch Series and run up front and regain his confidence. And I said, sure, I'm without a driver, and I'll be glad. So they bring in this guy, Ward Burton. And
Ward Burton.
And Ward Burton and I hit it off right away, and our first race was up at Loudon, and within 3 laps we were leading our first race in the Busch Series, and we had a great balance of the 95 season, I believe it was. It was 95 season, and Ward didn't drive all the races, but he drove a lot, and we ran up front, and we didn't win any races, but we certainly were a factor. And at the end of that year, Chevrolet contacted me and said, we know a guy that would be interested to drive for you guys. You need to make touch with him. And so I got in touch with David Green, who had won I think David had won the '94 Busch Championship, driving the Slim Jim car. So I got in touch with David and made a deal with him, and the old if a woulda, coulda, shoulda in racing, we should have won the championship. I think we lost by 8 points. And we ended up second. Really should have won the Busch Championship in that year. And sorry for the monologue, but it
no problem.
It helps me keep it all straight in my mind.
Yeah, no problem.
So,
what was ironic about having the Caterpillar sponsorship?
Well, there was a guy came to me and said that Caterpillar at the time was an associate sponsor on Kyle Petty's car in Winston Cup. And they had a taste of racing. They liked it. They thought it fit in their business model. And they had a gentleman that ran their hospitality program. And I knew him from Trans Am days. And he approached me and said that Caterpillar was interested in getting with the team, and we obviously were a championship team in Trans Am, and we had some, let's say, flair for doing hospitality. We actually did a lot of hospitality even in the Trans Am days. We had the big motor coach and used to entertain a lot of the clients of the various sponsors. And so he put me in touch with Caterpillar, and we were able to make a deal, and it was a pretty high profile company to be associated with a rookie team. And we of course hit it off and did reasonably well in our first year, and they stepped up the program those next years. And in that year with David Green in '96, they came to me about less than a third of the way through the season and said, okay, we got this Busch thing down pat. We want to go to Winston Cup. And I said, guys, we had a 5-year plan in the Busch series, and I don't know that I'm quite ready to make that leap. I mean, I told those guys back then, and as an analogy, that it was the difference between jumping across a sidewalk and jumping across the Grand Canyon. It was a quantum leap to go from the Busch series into Winston Cup, and I just wasn't ready. I didn't have the infrastructure. I just didn't have all the stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of like Casey Atwood, that driver in NASCAR that, made the leap to Cup too soon in 2001 and then never recovered.
But the difference with me is when I said to Caterpillar, I really don't have all the tools, and I don't have the equipment, I don't have the cars, I don't have the money. They said, oh, money? That's not a problem. What do you need? So I said, well, this is what I need to make that step. And I said, but it's not a loan, it's not sponsorship, it's money that I need, and you're gonna, if you want to do it, that's what I need. And they said, fine, here's the money. So with that, we were able to have cars built in the motor program, and built a beautiful shop, and that was great. Now the bad part of it is we just and I had told the CAT guys, I said, look, this is what's going to unfold. This is a timeline. This is what's going to happen. I'm going to fire a driver. I'm going to fire the chassis builder. I'm going to fire the engine builder. I'm going to fire the team manager. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And they said, well, how do you know that? I said, well, because every single guy before me, from Cale Yarborough to Jack Roush, has done the exact same thing. There's no shortcuts. You're gonna go through all of these teething pains. Oh, no, that won't happen to you. I said, yes, it will. And I showed them what I asked them. I said, how many man years did it take Rick Hendrick to win a race? At the time, Rick Hendrick was winning all the time. And I said, it took a long time. But you take 2-3 drivers times the years it took him to win a race, it didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
The same for Cale Yarborough. The same for all those guys. Well, they didn't believe that was going to happen, and when it did happen, they were understandably not happy. This was the end of the '98 season.
Yeah.
We had really struggled, and it just so happened that they were unhappy enough to be able to walk away from a very strong contract that I had, and I got some very good advice that said, if you ever want to walk away, now's the time to walk away. And I'm sort of fast forwarding it, but I realized that it was a ride that I never anticipated. I never really necessarily planned it to happen, but it had been a fun ride, but it had ceased to be fun anymore, and I was playing in an arena that I just didn't have the capital to keep up. I didn't have the plan after Caterpillar. Once they walked, what was I going to do? And so that was pretty much the end of my NASCAR career at the end of '98. I kept the shop. I kept the airplane. I leased my shop to Joe Bessie, who had Jeff Bodine driving for him. Okay. I also kept it during the period of Beth Ann Morgenthau when she had BAM racing with Shauna Robinson and Kenny Schrader. And
the 49 car.
The 49 car, and I told Tony Morgenthau, I said, look, I can save you millions and millions of dollars if you just listen to what I'm going to tell you. And he didn't, and they spent millions and millions of dollars, and they came to the pretty much same conclusion I did. Yeah. But I ended up then selling that whole facility to actually the Morgenthau's. They kept it for a long time, and then subsequently it's been sold and resold. And so I was pretty much out of racing from 1998 to 2012. And I bumped into my old teammate Jack Baldwin, who invited me to do a charity go-kart race. And when I say go-karts, these were racing go-karts, not Disney World go-karts.
Oh, okay.
And so we get into this thing, and after the first day of practice, Jack says to me, hey, you can still do this, so why don't you come back and be my teammate? We'll put the band back together again. Ooh. So I joined him, and we were involved in the Pirelli World Challenge in 2013, 14, and 15. We did our pro racing in the World Challenge, and at the end of 15, I'd sort of been there, done that, and my son was starting to get in racing, and so we got back into the SCCA amateur racing, And we did that in 16 and 17. We both won our regional championships, and we went to the runoffs. And at the end of 17, we had done an endurance race with this Champ car, and we decided to get into Champ car, which is the old ex-Chump car. And so we've got 3 Porsche Boxsters that we run in the Champ car endurance series.
Ooh.
And we're having just a great time. So in 10 minutes or less, that's my 25 plus years of racing history.
Nice.
So apologize for the monologue, but that's about the best way I could get through it.
No problem. But I will say, though, that the monologue kind of covered like 10 of my questions that were on a list. So, yeah. So, yeah, that's pretty cool. And I have a little more to ask, so, yeah.
Sure.
So, my next one that I should ask is, what was your reaction when the 96 Caterpillar car qualified second to Jeff Gordon at the Glen with Ron Fellows?
Well, other than the fact that we should have been on the pole, I was, and Jeff and I were friends, and I still remember he came over to me and says, "You guys can win this race." And I said, "I know we can win this race." And it was probably, I have to say, other than losing the Busch Championship on the last race of the season through a really, really terrible, I think, unfair situation, when we broke with Ron at the Glen through an oversight by one of the crew members, I think that was the worst that I ever felt in all of my racing career. I felt bad for the poor crew guy who felt terrible, but I also felt terrible that we passed up an opportunity to really, really showcase Ron's talent and our cars. We had some fantastic road racing cars. I had Brad Francis was my chief engineer, and Brad Francis was the real mentor behind Jack Baldwin's great IMSA GTO cars, the old Levi Garrett car and IMSA GTO. Brad was a real innovator at Richard Childress Racing, and was a real brain behind a lot of the unique things that Dale Earnhardt had on his car. Brad was an innovator, and we had a car. I guess the best way I can say it is the car that we had that same year with Robbie Gordon at Sears Point. Gary Nelson came to Brad and I after Tech and said, "Don't ever bring that car back to NASCAR." So that was the ultimate compliment, because Gary Nelson knew what Brad had done to that car and knew that it was, in the right hand and the right circumstances, would have been an unbeatable car. And when Robbie Robbie coulda, woulda, shoulda won Sonoma that year, and he ripped the Panhard bar out of the car with about 3 laps to go. He was going to win. He was going to win that race. That was tough. Probably a second disappointment to Ron breaking, but yeah, we had some really super road race cars in Winston Cup, that's for sure. Yeah,
and that's just tough. If I had to pick the biggest disappointment that I've had as a race fan, it had to be when at Talladega in 2014. Basically what happened was one of my drivers got eliminated from the chase, and a driver that I absolutely did not like back then ended up winning that race. So yeah,
it's tough. But that was that was a monumental disappointment.
Yeah, and yeah, that had to be tough. All right, so my next question that I have is, what is IMSA racing like compared to NASCAR racing?
Well, in those days or these days?
Any'll do.
Well, I think in the 80s, you were starting to see the crossover of some NASCAR drivers coming and doing IMSA races, particularly the 24 Hours of Daytona. And I remember Neil Bonnet was there, and the Allisons fielded a car, and it was certainly well known for the 24 Hours of Daytona and Sebring. And pretty much everybody sort of turned it off after that. Riverside was always a real popular race that got a lot of crossover. But I think if you really look into it, is the innovation that cars were able to achieve in IMSA due to what the rule books allowed, and saw how a lot of that stuff eventually worked its way into Winston Cup. It was pretty amazing. I mean, when you took engineers that were in IMSA, guys like Terry Satchel, who were really, really, really knowledgeable engineers, and then followed their career path after IMSA, they ended up in NASCAR. Terry Satchel and Brad Francis and guys like that, just to name two. They really, really had tremendous knowledge about suspension and shocks and chassis dynamics and engineering that basically didn't exist in the NASCAR in those days. And then, as time went on, adjustable shocks. I mean, back in the day, Dale Earnhardt and Morgan Shepherd would walk around in the paddock carrying their favorite shocks. I mean, they had their shocks they carried in their gym bag, and put these babies on. Well, next thing you know, Oleans is in there with shaker rigs and multiple adjustable shocks, and everybody had shock dynos in their trailer. Well, that stuff didn't exist in the NASCAR until people like IMSA and the whole road racing community really exposed the advantage of a lot of that technology. So I think that they used to always tease about sports car racers, the wine and cheese circuit, but I gotta tell you, there were a lot of really, really, really good road racers that would have been really excellent NASCAR drivers. People like Jack Baldwin.
Yeah.
If Jack Baldwin had left Tampa and kept driving and didn't stop in Atlanta, and if he kept driving to Charlotte, Jack Baldwin would have been a champion in NASCAR. There's no doubt in my mind. I think Dorsey Schrader would have been a top NASCAR driver. Ron Fellows, on and on and on. I think there were a lot of really, really good sports car drivers that understood the dynamics of race cars that really would have excelled in the stock car world.
Yeah, not only that, but NASCAR driver and sports car driver Boris said he made numerous starts in NASCAR other than road course races. And he even owned his own cup team at one point, which was the No Fear team. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said that sports car racers have held their own, really in all forms of racing. Of course, nobody better than AJ Foyt, who could dance between all of them like nobody, including Mario, that proved that they could drive anything. So
yeah. And speaking of AJ Foyt, my next question is, have you met any famous IndyCar drivers? or legends?
Well, when I had U.S. Tobacco, of course, AJ had Copenhagen, which was one of the brands of U.S. Tobacco, and of course we knew each other and spent time with each other, and I say this in the best possible way. AJ was a guy, in my opinion, that felt that every dollar U.S. Tobacco gave me was one less dollar than they gave him. So he had a very competitive spirit about him, and while he was extremely pleasant to my young son and my wife, he was fabulous with kids and wives and girlfriends. He always treated another racer as, "You're in my pocket." So,
Yeah.
So I certainly got the opportunity to know him quite well. I actually had Pancho Carter drove with me in the IMSA series. Pancho came to me and said, this is back when Indy cars were going to start doing road races, and Pancho had a really difficult accident, and he said, I got to learn how to drive a sports car. So Pancho drove with me at both the Daytona 24-hour and the Sebring 12-hour. That was the year that he was on the pole at the Indy 500.
And he broke down early on and finished
like the first
last.
lap.
Yeah,
first lap. I think probably the biggest goosebumps I've had in racing is I had the pass that I was out on the grid when, after they cleared the first wave of people and the second wave of people and the third wave of people, I was still there.
Ooh.
And to stand there and look down that straightaway, it was a total goosebump experience.
Yeah.
But I got to know a lot of the IndyCar drivers. Jerry Grant was a dear friend of mine. Jerry Grant ran Champion Spark Plugs racing program, and through Jerry, I probably met every living legend back in the day, because I'd go to the Indy 500 and, meet Lloyd Ruby and Jim Rathman and you name them.
Dan Gurney?
No, I knew Dan quite well, but all of those guys were friends of Champion and Jerry, and of course I knew Dan from racing together in IMSA. But over the years, you kind of become numb, I guess, after a while of meeting people that were clearly your heroes or idols when you were growing up, guys like AJ or Mario or someone like that. The opportunity to meet Jackie Stewart, for example, was incredidible.
Technically, his actual name now is Sir Jackie Stewart.
Sir Jackie. Yeah, I saw him last week on TV at the F1 race. I'll tell you a funny story. My wife, who was a real trooper and went to virtually all the NASCAR races, all the Busch races and the Winston Cup races, we had taken a vacation, and we went to Africa. And we're on this safari, and she said to me, "Oh, this is going to be so great to be away from racing and not, having to deal with racing." And it's going to be great. So we're in this camp in Kenya, and in the morning we go out and to get into our Jeep. We're going to go look at game, and there was another couple in the Jeep. There were just two couples, and so I introduced myself and my wife, and this gentleman introduces himself and his wife, and I asked him to repeat his name, and it was Ken Tyrrell. And so I said to my wife, I said, "You're not going to be happy." So I got to spend a day, and for the next couple of days, riding in Jeeps throughout Africa, talking to the very famous Ken Tyrrell about Formula One and the Shadow, and and all the great people, all the drivers that he had. So that was probably the most unusual meeting I ever had.
Yeah, the most unusual meeting that I've ever had with any motorsports drivers was last year when I went to the NASCAR race at ISM Raceway in Phoenix, Arizona. Basically, I was on pit road during pre-race ceremonies. I was kind of on pit road at a time that I wasn't supposed to be, And basically, the person that I encountered was Kyle Larson. Ever heard of him?
Mm-hmm.
And basically, I encountered him when he was in line for a porta-john, and I asked for a photo. And he had that look on his face as if to say, who is this guy, And I got a photo with him, and it turned out very well, but it was kind of funny because it included the porta-john in it, and it had my mom in it as well, so she didn't, She didn't want a photo of her with a porta-john, but it turned out very well otherwise.
So what other things can I tell you?
Let me think, because you really covered a lot with your monologue, but I think I have a few more. Let me see what there is. Which NASCAR film is the best between Talladega Nights and Days of Thunder, in your opinion?
Well, other than the fact that I've never seen Talladega Nights, I thought Days of Thunder was entertaining.
Yeah.
And I really can't say that either of those were, would hold a candle to movies that I've seen, or specials like Senna, which I thought is, one of the better racing shows, movies, documentaries I've ever seen. I thought it was very good. I thought The Art of Racing for the Rain was good because I enjoyed the book.
Ooh.
But I was not a big Talladega Nights fan.
Yeah, because some people thought that it was kind of stupid compared to Days of Thunder and a few other films you mentioned.
Yeah.
Because it has Will Ferrell in it, and it has John C. Reilly and a few other comedians.
Yeah, I would say I probably thought it mocked racing to a point, and I didn't really want to support that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. All right, so my next question after that is, do you recall any times in NASCAR in the 1980s or the 1990s where a driver intentionally wrecked another driver? Do you recall that at all, or no?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say back in those days it was pretty well given that if you didn't want to be leading the last lap with Dale Earnhardt behind you because you were going to win. I remember, I think it was at Darlington or Rockingham when Hut Strickland was in the Circuit City car, and he was going to win, and Earnhardt turned him around like in turn 4, and I think that was probably one of the most unpopular spin outs of all time, because I think everybody would have loved to see Hut Strickland win a race.
Yeah.
So, I would say that happened quite a bit.
Okay. Yeah, because there was an incident a few years back where one of the NASCAR stars intentionally wrecked another driver, and the medias were kind of villainizing him, saying that didn't happen back in the 80s. And I was like, yeah, right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Well, I think, like I can't remember. I think it was Kenseth and Joey Logano.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. Yeah.
At Martinsville, I think. That type of really blatant drive under their door and then drive them into the wall.
Yeah.
That's a little bit different than Earnhardt, wiggling Terry Labonte in Bristol, or what he did to Hut Strickland. I think there's a difference between, let's say, a competitive
competitive move.
Yeah, a competitive move rather than just wrecking somebody. I mean, driving into their door and then powering them into the wall.
That's different.
That's different, and I don't think anybody would condone that. And I imagine if Kenseth or any of those guys could have that back again, they probably would take it back.
Yeah.
But
just so you know, I'm not usually supportive of intentional wrecking. I don't really condone that, just so you know. It was just a question that I had to ask.
Right, understand.
Because, there's conflicting information that I've gotten over the years. Some people said that it was common, while some people said, it wasn't. So I just thought I would ask you to see what your opinion on it was.
Yeah. I don't think wrecking. I would say back in the 80s and 90s, those guys, if they wrecked, it was a consequence of them trying to take a competitive advantage in a pass.
Okay.
But not driving the guy into the fence.
Yeah, and I kind of interviewed Bobby Allison a couple years back, and I asked him about it, and he was like, he kind of said a similar thing as you. He was like, yeah, that was common, but only in a competitive move, not not fixing your car on pit road and then coming out and wrecking the guy leading the race.
Right.
That's what Allison told me. And so I'm just trying to learn from a variety of a lot of people to see what their opinion was. But yeah, in any case, I'm sure though that in any case, if Joey Logano and Matt Kenseth could take anything in their back, they probably would, That's just my opinion.
Yep.
So yeah, my final question, and I think this will be the final one because I'm kind of running out of time a little bit, but my last question that I have is this. Have you met any famous Formula One drivers?
Ooh. Well, Gurney was a Formula One driver.
Oh, yeah.
But current vintage, not famous, but I would say of the current vintage, no.
Okay, got it.
I think they're great. I love them. I think Hamilton is great. I like all those guys.
Yeah, not a big F1 fan over the years, and the reason I'm not a big fan is because the only guys to win nowadays are anyone who qualifies in the top 3. But if I had to pick a driver that I liked, it probably would either be Jacques Villeneuve or Michael Schumacher.
Well, now that you say Jacques Villeneuve, I actually have met him, and actually we were co-speakers at an event in Three Rivers, Trois-Rivières in Canada. And so I guess of all the famous ones, I'd say he's probably the most famous. I don't think, other than meeting Jackie Stewart and Mario and Dan Gurney, but of a current vintage, I'd say Villeneuve is certainly one that I met.
I find it kind of a little bit funny that Villeneuve has not won any single race in motorsports since his 1997 F1 title. I wonder what his slump is.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. All right. I think that's all. I think I have plenty of information. I really appreciate the call.
I apologize for the monologue, but that was the best way for me to keep it all straight in my head.
No problem. I'm fine with the monologue. Anything helps.
Excellent. Well, good luck in your effort.
Thank you very much, and I'll let you know when the book is published.
Excellent. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, man.
Bye.
Bye. Cool. That turned out very well. Thanks for all who joined me.
Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please hit like and subscribe if you did so, and please continue supporting our amazing guest. And everybody, we'll see you next time on SFM.
Hi, this is Ted Warner speaking. While the checkered flag is waved for this program, stay tuned for next week for the next episode of SFM. Thanks to Doug Kenny for what he does for motorsports.